Hi, I'm Matthew Dix of Storyworthy and Speak Up, and today I'm the guest on The Inspiring Show.
Welcome to The Inspiring Show with Paul and Jennifer Hensel, featuring inspiring interviews with thought leaders, storytellers, entrepreneurs, influencers, and legacy builders just like you. Learn from experts about finding your voice, mastering your mindset, and creating movements with your message. Tap into timeless wisdom and today's top strategies for transcending to new levels of success, happiness, and joy.
Hi, everyone. I'm Paul Hensel.
I'm Jennifer Hensel.
And we are hosts of The Inspiring Show. Now, we've been looking forward to interviewing the next guest for quite a while now, haven't we, Ben?
Oh, we're big fans, actually. But before we dive into this interview, we want to let you know that our stories are in the first 2 episodes of this podcast. So go back, if you're just jumping in with this episode, go back and listen to our other previous episodes to find out our story and the stories of some of the other folks we've had on so far.
Now, today's guest is Matthew Dix.
Yes. He wrote one of the best storytelling books ever written. I'd say the best. It's just amazing. We'll talk about it in the interview, and then we'll tell you how to get a copy at the end of the interview.
Now, Matthew Dix, when not hunched over a computer screen, he fills his days as an elementary school teacher, a storyteller, a speaking coach, and a life coach. He has been teaching for 21 years and is a former West Hartford Teacher of the Year. Matthew is a 45-time Moth StorySLAM champion and 6-time GrandSLAM champion whose stories have been featured on their nationally syndicated Moth Radio Hour. Matthew Dix is the internationally best-selling author of multiple novels, most notably what we mentioned, Storyworthy, Engage, Teach, Persuade, and Change Your Life Through the Power of Storytelling. Matthew is also the co-founder and creative director of Speak Up, a Hartford-based storytelling organization that produces shows throughout New England. He teaches storytelling and public speaking to individuals, corporations, universities, religious institutions, and school districts around the world. So sit back and enjoy our interview with Matthew Dix. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Matthew. It's such a pleasure to have you on our show.
We're big fans, and we have your book.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate
enjoying it. Storyworthy.
Now, you are quite the master storyteller.
You're very kind. Thank you.
So I'm interested, we're interested. Could you take us back and share the moment that changed things for you?
Sure. I guess there's been a lot of them, but the one I always think about is, I guess, the one the furthest back. It was 1988. It was November of 1988. I was 17 years old. I was in an English class, my senior English class. I was a kid who was in a lot of trouble at that point in my life. I was about to be kicked out of my home by my parents. The expectation was you graduate and then you take care of yourself. And while my classmates were sort of thinking about college and safety schools and SAT scores, no one had ever said the word college to me. You know, I never took an SAT. I never did any of those things. I was thinking about what was I going to eat and where was I going to live, you know, when June came around. So school wasn't super important to me. I liked to learn. It was sort of my saving grace is if I liked the subject of the class, I invested. And if I didn't, I found ways to get around the work. So I was in Mr. Campopiano's English class, and it was a bunch of people who were college bound and then me in the back of the room. And in November, he taught us satire. He introduced this concept to me for the first time, and I loved it. It was sort of an opportunity to make fun of people in a literary way, to be sarcastic, which is really my talent in life. And so I dove into it. I studied it. We had to write a piece. I wrote what I thought at the time was the best piece of written work by any American in history. That is genuinely how I felt.
Nice.
And I handed it in, expecting glory. And a few days later, I got it back. And the grade on the paper was a B-. And next to the B minus, it said, not satire, too obvious. And I was really angry. I felt like the school had betrayed me, like they had put a fool in charge of this class, someone who could not recognize greatness. So I charged to the front of the room, and I told Mr. Campo how I felt about him and his grade. And he was the kind of guy who, did not put up with nonsense. He was sort of a angry guy underneath. And so he went after me, and we sort of went back and forth. The class got quiet right away because these were not kids who were used to teachers and students shouting at each other. And finally, Mr. Campo said, stop. He said, read your piece to the class. If they agree that it's satire, I'll make your B minus an A minus. But if they agree with me that it's too obvious, your B minus becomes a C minus, which was a great lesson in terms of becoming a teacher, raise the stakes on kids whenever possible. And so I agreed. I stood in front of the class. I started reading my piece. And I was a couple sentences in when a girl laughed at what I had written, a girl who I had sort of had a crush on my entire life, a girl who had not noticed me until this moment when I had made her laugh through something I had written. And as I continued to read, everyone started to laugh. They all thought it was great. And when I came to the end, Mr. Campos said, raise your hand if you think it's satire. And every hand went up, including Mr. Campos. He acknowledged, he said, listen, on the page, it's flat. It does not read as satire, but you brought life to it. Like, you're so sarcastic that you managed to bring the satire out of this flat piece of writing. So I still have the piece of writing to this day. It is not the best thing that any American has ever written by any stretch of the imagination, but it has a B minus on it, and that B minus has a big X in it, and above it is an A minus. It was an enormous moment for me. I can't understate it. 3 things I like to say happened in that moment. The first was I made girls laugh. Cool. And that cannot be understated in terms of a young man or a 48-year-old man. Like, my goal is to make my wife laugh, keep her hanging on, give her a reason to stay at home.
Absolutely. Yes,
yeah, that was huge for me. It also made an authority figure look foolish. I proved that a teacher was wrong, which is huge for me and for a lot of people, to just be able to speak to power and get a response that you're looking for. But the most important thing that happened to me was I made my B minus into an A minus. And I felt fundamentally in my heart that I had written something and it had changed my future. I had managed to write, speak, and convince other people that, the present that I'm living in is incorrect, and I need to have a better future. And for a kid who had no future, who was worried about where he was going to live in a few months, that was enormous for me. I just felt like I had found something that might be something for me someday. And so I came back to school on Monday, and I started my first business. I started writing term papers for my classmates. It was my first writing gig, the first time I ever got paid to write anything. And with the money I earned from writing term papers for my classmates, I bought my first car, a 1976 Chevy Malibu. And that was it. Sort of, it's the perfect formula to create someone who's going to write and speak and tell stories. It's, it's girls, and it's money, and it's a car, and it's, speaking to power, but mostly it's that this is something that I could use to make a better future for myself. And since that day, without exception and without exaggeration, truly, I have written every single day of my life. I have written on my wedding day, every day of my honeymoon. I was writing in the birthing room as my wife was pushing babies out of her body. I was in the other side of the room writing in between the pushing. I've written with pneumonia. I have written before and after surgery. Every single day of my life, I have written in an effort to make that into something that someone might want. And it took 17 years to do it before I published my first novel. So, it took a long time.
Wow.
But I think that's important, the idea that you have to work long and you have to work hard to get to where you want to be. But it all started that day in Mr. Campos' class, when he gave me a chance to do that thing that no one had given me a chance to do before.
Wow, that's awesome. Must have been quite the confidence boost.
Yeah, it really was. I mean, if we're being honest, I was pretty confident, and I've always been, pretty confident. I like to say I'm arrogant, bordering on confident. I need to pull it back a little sometimes. I work with a lot of people sort of in public speaking and storytelling, and I realize right away how powerful confidence is, the ability to stand on a stage and feel great about what you're about to say, and almost think, if the audience doesn't like it, it's on them, it's not on me. That is a powerful feeling to have, and not many people have it. So I do recognize that is a huge asset.
Awesome. Hey, now I read something that I want to ask you about. Could you explain the story of you dying twice before the age of 18?
Yeah, so, well, it happened twice. The first time it happened, I was about 12 years old, and I was stung by a bee.
Oh.
And I did not know I was allergic to bees at the time. Frankly, no one in the 1980s were, as far as I know, they weren't allergic to anything. Everyone was eating peanut butter. You know, we were all like walking through secondhand smoke and like chewing on asbestos, and nobody had any problems whatsoever.
Yeah.
So I was riding my bike home. I got stung by a bee with my buddy. My buddy actually got stung about 25 times. He jumped into a pile of leaves. Had I jumped into the pile of leaves, I would have died that day. But because he jumped first, he got stung, and one bee came and stung me. And so I got on my bike and I rode home eventually. And on the way home, I started to have a reaction. And by the time I got home, it was a full-blown reaction. I didn't know what it was because I just didn't understand that this could happen. But I could feel my feet swelling up in my sneakers. I couldn't breathe.
Oh, wow.
And when I got home, no one was home. So I called my mother, who was in the hospital having back surgery. It was back in the days when you could actually call directly into a hospital room because every room had its own phone number. And I told my mother I couldn't breathe. And she said, hang up the phone and call 911. But at that point, I was on the ground with the phone and I couldn't get myself off the ground. I was out of breath. So she had the woman in the bed next to her call 911, and she listened to me and screamed at me to keep breathing. And, you know, by the time the paramedics got there, I was no longer breathing and my heart wasn't beating. They broke the door down because I locked the door for some reason when I got home. And so my mother listened to them doing CPR on me. They had no idea that she was still on the phone while they were doing that.
Wow.
So they got me back that day, and I'm okay. And then when I was 17, 2 days before Christmas, I was driving home. I was trying to get back home to get my McDonald's uniform so I could get to work. And I was in a car accident. I went through the windshield in a head-on collision. I wasn't wearing my seatbelt on truly one of the only days of my life I have forgotten to wear my seatbelt.
Wow.
And so, you know, the paramedics arrived and I stopped breathing and my heart stopped beating in the back of that ambulance that day. And they brought me back. I was aware of them bringing me back that day because I suddenly was in the back of an ambulance with a woman straddling my waist and a guy forcing tubes down my throat. I didn't know I had died and, you know, come back to life. They don't tell you that either. They don't like let you know that right away. I didn't find out till like 3 days later when a nurse was yelling at me. And she said, you know, you were dead for a minute, so stop giving me a hard time. And I said, what are you talking about? And she said, you know that you died in the back of that ambulance? You're lucky to be here. So yeah, I got lucky twice. Very, very lucky.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Quite the stories.
Well, it's great. I mean, it's great. It's not great. Neither moment was great, but you know, those two moments plus an unfortunate incident that happened when I was 21, an armed robbery that I suffered through. Those moments have really sort of codified my life and given me this sort of extreme philosophy of I must do every single thing I can in order to make every single day as valuable as possible. And so I'm constantly making decisions, not based upon sort of the person I am right now, but the person I know I will be someday. You know, I like to say I'm making all my decisions based upon what the 100-year-old version of myself would want me to do today. Because when I'm 100 and I'm lying in my deathbed, looking back on my life, I want the 48-year-old version of me to be spending time with my kids, writing like hell, taking as many stages as possible. You know, I don't watch a lot of television, even though I love television. I don't play any video games, even though I love video games, because I know the 100-year-old version of me is saying, don't play video games. Don't watch television. It's a waste. And so even though I truly love both of those things, I'm not sort of being, you know, I'm not being an erudite jackass by saying I don't watch television. We watch some. You know, my wife and I probably average 2 hours of television a week, except during the NFL season when I watch football games. But I make the decisions based upon that because I know what it is like to come so close. I know what regret feels like. I know how awful it feels when you think that you're about to breathe your last breath.
Yeah, for sure. Now, there's got to be a lot of lessons that you've learned through along the way there. Could you share some of those with us?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. a lot of them come out of the things that I sort of just described. You know, the thing that I am most obsessed about, the thing that I want people to really understand, actually the book that I'm writing right now, is the idea that time is our most precious commodity. And I know people say it, but they absolutely 100% do not live as if time is valuable in any way whatsoever.
Mm.
I have sort of found a way to maximize almost every moment of my day. My wife says I'm a bit of a robot. She says it's a little ridiculous, but I don't let a minute go by. You know, I do things like when I counsel people all the time on sort of becoming more productive human beings. And, you know, I point out to people that I live 10 minutes from my job, and I have lived 10 minutes from my job for the last 21 years. And that wasn't luck. That was the acknowledgement that I know people who spend an hour each day driving back and forth to work. And so when people say, how do you get so much done? That is the question I get asked most often in life. How do you manage to get so much done? I always say, what's your commute? And they say, it's an hour, hour and a half. And I say, well, I'm killing you because I can get home in 10 minutes. The gym that I go to every day, I chose my gym based upon which gym is closest to my house. I know someone who goes to a gym 35 minutes from her house because she likes it better, because she thinks the quality of the gym is more important than the 35 minutes that she could be spending with her family, with her friends, doing whatever creative pursuit she wants to engage in. She actually thinks that a pretty gym is going to mean something to her in the long run, when I know the best gym is always the closest gym. And I take that strategy to the nth degree in every single thing I do, from eating, you know. So for example, when I'm eating, if I'm eating with people, I will spend hours eating with them if that's what they want. I enjoy a great meal with company. But if I'm eating on my own, there's no way that I'm going to sit down and be still and eat a meal, because the 100-year-old version of myself is saying, get up and do something while you're eating. Food is a mobile product. So like when we're done talking today, I'm going to have some Campbell's chunky sirloin soup because my family's gone. And that will take me 2 minutes to cook, and I will eat it out of the pan. And that'll be the end of it. It'll take me 5 minutes, and it'll give me everything that I need, and I will move on with my life. And, you know, I know people love to cook. They say, I love to make good meals. I'm just telling you, the 100-year-old version of yourself wants you to get that out of the way if you're eating alone and get onto something more interesting. And so I do that with everything. I do it with sleep. You know, I do it with crazy things like I've figured out the quickest way to walk through my school to get from one point to another, and I use that path every single time. You know, we were watching the movie Kroc, the Ray Kroc story the other night, my wife and I. It's a docudrama on Ray Kroc. I worked for McDonald's for like 10 or 12 years while I put myself through college and escaped homelessness and all of these things. And there was a moment in that movie where Ray Kroc is sort of organizing the kitchen to eliminate every single wasted step. It becomes this symphony of movement between the employees. And my wife pauses the video and she turns to me and she goes, is that why you are the way you are? And I thought, like, not exactly, because I've always been this way, but I do think actually working 10 years at McDonald's and learning that every movement counts, you know, that your ability to actually work quickly is compromised if you are taking extra steps. All of those things come together for me. And so when people tell me I understand how valuable time is, I say, I really don't think you do. Because I just saw you waste 12 minutes. 12 minutes is enormous. It's just, when you're about to die, 12 more minutes is fantastic. So I just assume I'm about to die. And so if I can save 12 minutes, that's fantastic. And so I think if everyone just sort of applied that belief system to their life, they would be happier. They would get the things done that they want to get done, because no one I meet ever tells me, I'm getting everything done. I got plenty of time, Matt. You know, it's just not the way people live, but that's the way I live. It's the way I feel all the time.
That's a great lesson. So I want to ask you, what advice could you give to someone who is looking for their passion?
The thing that I tell people is to say yes to every single thing that crosses your path. It's very popular today to tell people to say no, that you have to set boundaries, limits, you know, don't let people impose upon your time. And I disagree with all of that. I throw it all away. If you're lucky, and I think most of us are, opportunities come by all the time. And I think most of the time we say no to them. I think we say no because either we don't think we're going to have enough time. And you know how I feel about time. I think you're just probably not maximizing it properly. Or a lot of times people say no because it doesn't sound very interesting to them. And that makes sense sort of on a first step basis. But my belief is if you say yes to everything, you open a door that you can eventually close if you need to. But by saying no, you'd never walk into that room to see what it is like. So I've had opportunities like, I had a friend named Andy who came to me and said, I want to write a rock opera. I've written the music, but my story isn't good. And I know you write stories. Do you want to work with me? I thought, no, I don't. I don't like opera. I'm not really into musicals. I have no desire to do any of this with you. And I think you're going to be difficult to work with. Right? So, but I said, let me hear your music. So he played the music he had written. And I thought, I hate all your songs. And then he said, do you want to write a rock opera with me? And I said, yes. Even though I did not want to write a rock opera, I decided to write a rock opera. And what I discovered through this process is Andy and I work beautifully together. That it turns out I love writing musicals. I transformed all his songs into songs that I thought were great. I said, your protagonist sucks. I want a new protagonist. Your story is terrible. I want a new story. He went along with all of it. I didn't understand how collaborative he could be. And we wrote a rock opera that we produced in a local theater, and now he's sort of shopping around. And since then, we've written 3 other musicals. And now I'm writing a musical with another person. We're writing a 2-person show, which is a musical that I will star in, even though I cannot sing, because she said, that's okay, you can talk, sing. I don't know what that means. I'm afraid to sing in public. I've sung in public in musicals only while in the role as an old man and an ogre. And that is basically the kind of singing that I can do, which is monsters and angry old people. But I'm going to do this now. And it's all because I said yes to a ridiculous idea. You know, my friend called me 22 years ago while I was working on a paper in college and said, do you want to be a wedding DJ? And I thought, no, I don't want to be a wedding DJ. I've never attended a wedding other than yours. And I didn't have that good of a time. And I don't know much about music or equipment. I don't even really know what a wedding DJ does. No reason to say yes. But I said yes, because I always say yes. I actually said, I need to finish this paper, but when I'm done, yes, I'll be a wedding DJ with you. Right? That was 22 years ago. We've been DJing ever since. I don't do it very much now, but I'm still doing about 4 weddings a year now. Jeez. The biggest deal was that wedding DJ job allowed me to fund my time at home for my wife when our kids were born. That helped a lot. More importantly, every Saturday for years, I stood in front of 200 half-drunk strangers, and I convinced them to do things that I needed them to do. I had no idea that one day I would be standing on stages in front of 2,000 people, 2,000 strangers, and suddenly I didn't care about the audience because I had been doing it all my life. Like it was a training ground for something that I didn't know I was eventually going to do. And it was a job I never wanted. I had never had any interest in. I could have said no, and my life would be drastically different today had I said no. I wouldn't have said, no, I'm going to do this instead. Most of the time people just say no. And so I say, you have to say yes to everything, no matter what it is, no matter how crazy it is, because so often these things will intertwine. And whatever creative project you're working on, these things that you say yes to, which don't seem to be related in any way, will ultimately either inform something you're doing, will become part of something you're doing, or eventually you can say, I said yes, I gave it a chance, and now I'm walking away. It's not working. But I don't think we should say no right away. It has made the biggest difference in my creative life, having all of these unique, varied, and somewhat ridiculous experiences all come together and work for me in wondrous ways.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, well, it's extremely entertaining. You hear your thought process before you say yes. So I like that.
Yeah, well, if it wasn't like that, everyone would just say yes, right? If every opportunity sounded great, we would all be doing great. It's just because most opportunities sound terrible in the beginning, and yet they work out just fine.
Now, you are a great writer. We love your book, Storyworthy.
Thank you.
We'll put that out there. You tell great stories. Now, would you be able to share just a few tips and techniques for constructing and kind of telling better stories?
Yeah, I'd love to. I think the thing that people mostly need to understand, I guess it's two things. One is everyone has stories. I went for a walk with a woman today who said, I'm not sure if I have a story. And I said, you have 400 stories.
Yeah.
You just don't know that they are stories yet. I can teach you how they are stories. So everyone has a story. Everyone has many, many stories. And the most important thing you can do is to find the stories in your life, to start to recognize them, to start to tell them, to start to record them. I engage in this process called homework for life, which is too much probably for us to talk about right here. But if people just go onto the internet and Google homework for life, they'll find my TED Talk. It's the best way to find stories in your life. It's the best way to change your life. Of all the things I'm going to say today, going and watching that TED Talk will change your life, because even if you don't plan on telling stories, it is a way to become reflective about your life. It'll change the way you view your life and the way that you perceive your past. It's beautiful. So you got to find stories to tell.
Okay.
Once you have the stories to tell, the trick is most people don't understand what a story actually is. Most people think a story is stuff that happened to me told chronologically, and unfortunately that is awful. That is
Yeah.
a bad way to tell a story. That is when your friend comes home from Bermuda and you ask, how was Bermuda? And they begin detailing every day of your trip and you regret ever asking that question, right? That's what most people think stories are. So what people have to understand is that stories are essentially singular moments in our lives. I call them 5-second moments. They're moments of transformation or realization that happen instantaneously almost always, which is why I say they happen in the course of 5 seconds. It's a moment in our lives where either we used to be one kind of person and then some stuff happened and now we're a new kind of person. That's the moment we're aiming at. Or I used to think one thing and then some stuff happened and now I think a new thing. The think I knew a thing or now I'm a new kind of person, that's the story. That's what we're looking for. We're looking for moments where something fundamentally changed in our life. That is what people need to find and talk about. That's the kind of thing that touches people's hearts and minds, as opposed to stuff that happened to me over the course of the day, the week, the month that I'm going to talk about now in chronological order. So you find those moments. If you just do that, you're better than most people, because that is the essence of storytelling. It's the same thing in movies, by the way. That is how movies operate. Movies, at the end, our hero, our protagonist, is always making a fundamental change in their life in order to achieve the goal that they're trying to realize. In our stories, in our real life stories, we don't have to be trying to achieve a goal, defeat a bad guy, cross a river. We just have to have a change. That's good enough for people in real life because there's no screen and popcorn involved. Once you find that moment, that fundamental moment of change, you have to find the beginning of your story. That creates a frame for your story. That is the most important thing you can do. And to find the beginning of the story, you simply ask yourself, what's the opposite of the end of your story? Sort of what's the opposite of your change? My favorite example is When Harry Met Sally. It's the simplest version of a story. At the end of the story, Harry and Sally fall in love. What is the beginning of the story? Harry and Sally hate each other, right? And if you don't know at the beginning of the story that they're going to be in love by the end of the story, you're crazy. But that is how all stories work, including the stories that I tell about my life. In the beginning of my story, I am one kind of person, or I'm thinking one kind of thing. And then some stuff happens, and now I think a new thing. Star Wars is the same way. Luke Skywalker is a boy on a planet who doesn't believe in the Force. And then some stuff happens, and at the end of the story, he turns off his computer, and he relies on the Force to destroy the Death Star, right? It's really a story about religion, actually. It's a boy who finds religion and uses religion to defeat the dark side. Even Han Solo in that story has that moment. It's, I only care about myself. I'm just a scoundrel and a smuggler. And then some stuff happens. And at the end of the story, he joins forces, comes and sweeps in at the moment, risks his life and everything to help his friend destroy the Death Star. That is how all of our stories work. No, those are grandiose examples.
Yeah.
We don't need grandiose examples. We can have little moments like, I used to think I was a good person, and then some stuff happened and I realized I'm kind of a selfish person. I love that story. People love that story too, because they realize, oh, I'm selfish too. He's just like me. So we're looking for moments of real change, and then we're looking for the opposite of that to start our story. There's a million other things to do, but if you just do that, you're better than 90% of the people telling stories, because most people just start stories with the first thing they think about, which is usually like, I woke up in the morning or I got on the plane, right? That's how they start their stories. And stories almost never end in a good spot. They usually end because dinner ends, because someone interrupted, because a bell rang, because a phone rang. Stories don't ever come to a satisfying conclusion in real life because people just kind of meander and pick and don't actually say anything of meaning. So just do that and you're going to be better than most people.
Nice.
Wow, that's an amazing tip.
Yeah, I like that a lot.
That's incredible. Transformation.
Yes.
Yeah. And keeping it simple.
Yeah, I really believe in keeping it simple. I mean, I've told stories about dying and coming back to life and being, robbed at gunpoint and being homeless. I was arrested and tried for a crime I didn't commit. I've been in jail. I've told all those stories, but they're not my best stories. They're not my favorite stories. I love stories about tiny little moments in my life when someone says something to me and my heart moves. I'll never forget, just recently, my wife and I were talking about my mother, who passed about 13 years ago. And I was talking about some of her failures as a mother, how she didn't quite do the things I wanted her to do. And my wife looked at me, and my wife only knew my mother for a couple of years before she passed, but she looked at me and she said, "Matt, your mother was depressed her whole life, right?" And I thought, no, I didn't know that. But my God, you have just changed the entire perspective that I have on my mother. That's a story. I didn't need to die or end up in jail or end up homeless. My wife had to say something to me that opened my eyes in a new way. She's also done things like, "Matt, you acted like a jerk at dinner tonight, right?" And I've thought, no, I didn't realize that, but you are right. I said things that probably hurt other people. That's also a story, right? So just small moments of change are the ones that mean the most to people. Because if I tell you about the story about going through the windshield or having a gun to my head and the trigger pulled, we don't connect, right? You don't connect on yeah, Matt, I know what that's like. I've gone through a windshield. Someone pulled a trigger on me once, right? That's not going to connect. But suddenly realizing something about a parent that you never realized before, people understand that. Suddenly having your wife tell you that you're a jerk when you didn't realize you were being a jerk, everyone understands that. Like
I can't relate to that. No,
yeah.
I can.
It's those little moments that people connect to. And that's why when I get off stages, people share the most remarkable secrets with me, things they have never shared with anyone in their life they trust me with, not because they know me, but because I stand up and I say things that are vulnerable and meaningful and that connect to them in some profound way.
Awesome.
That is amazing. We found that also. Our journey started with Paul's near-death story and his near-death accident.
Yeah.
And then we went on, we found that telling his story really transformed us and helped Paul through his recovery. And when we told the story, other people would want to tell their stories.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't matter. It would just be some kind of change, like you're saying. It could be about anything.
Yeah, that's great. My next book is, I'm writing that productivity book on time, but I'm also, because I have a lot of time, I'm also writing a book. My next storytelling book is called The Healing Power of Storytelling. And it's the idea that when we tell our stories, what can happen when we tell stories and when we're willing to be listeners of stories, because so often people aren't willing to listen. Someone wants to tell a story, it's going to probably take 6 minutes and people just don't have the time. Imagine you don't have 6 minutes, but you're willing to have an hour commute, or you're willing to hit the snooze button 4 times, but some human wants to say something important to you and you say, I just don't have the time, or you don't give them the attention they deserve. It's a book about that.
Oh, that's amazing.
Do you any idea when that date for when it's going to be published, or?
I don't know. I mean, I'm sort of, just between us. My agent is a little annoyed with me because she wants me to write a proposal and then sell the book and then write the book. And that's usually how I sell books now. But I hate writing proposals. So I lied to her and told her I'd work on the proposal, but I'm just going to write the book instead. So I'm hoping to have the book done in, let's say, 4 to 6 months, but then it would be another year before it comes out. So it'll be a while, sadly, but I'm working hard at it.
Okay, cool. Well, I'll look forward to that when it comes out.
Thank you.
We're loving your book. We tell everybody about it. We ended up starting a little story called Story Academy. It's a little story club where we help people tell their story and monetize their message. And we tell everybody about your book. And it is one of the best written books in history, in my opinion.
Oh.
It's got stories, it's got humor, it's got just your take on certain things that have happened in your life. And it's a real practical guide for people of how they can pull the stories out of their own life. And then you talk about telling their story, a little bit about being on stage and things like that. Tell us a little bit about those tips around that.
About being on stage?
Well, you've won many
Yeah.
moth competitions and things like that. That's amazing. What an amazing experience. We don't have a moth here in the city we live, but we follow it and we love it.
Oh, that's great. I mean, I work a lot with people, getting them to do these things, to take stages and tell stories.
Yeah.
Nervousness and stage fright is a big deal for a lot of people. I mean, the surveys say that people would rather die than publicly speak. The things I try to tell people, I try to make them understand that when you're vulnerable on stage and you speak about your failures and your flaws and your faults, that people will love you for it. I had a woman in a workshop once tell me, she's been in a bunch of my workshops and she attends my shows all the time, so she's heard many of my stories. She said, "You're the bravest person I know." And I said, "No, I'm not. Because for me, I have always been willing to share every single thing about me." My friend Andy, actually, the guy who writes the musicals with me, he says I live out loud, which is basically whatever happens to me, I say. So for me, I have arrogance, narcissism, and stupidity that weave a blanket that protect me. But for most people, that's not the case. It really is frightening. And unfortunately, the only way to overcome that fear is to actually do it once. And you will discover I didn't die. And it doesn't mean the next time will be easier. I work with real professional performers who before shows are still incredibly nervous. And I'm the worst person to be around because I just sit back and try to talk to them. I'm like, "Hey, how's it going, guys?" And they're like, "Don't talk to me. I'm trying to," they get very nervous. But it's one of those things that I say, it's a hard thing to do. And hard things require you to do hard things. It's a hard thing to do. It's not something that many people can do. So you have to be willing to be brave and do it once. And you have to listen to me and trust me when I say, when you are vulnerable, when you speak about yourself in a way that expresses not your best qualities, not those things, because nobody likes a bragger. As much as you might think they want to hear about your successes, they don't. They genuinely are not interested unless it's your mother. They really don't care about your successes. If you're willing to speak vulnerably, people will love you for it. So often I tell a story about something terrible I've done and I step off the stage and it's always a woman who comes up to me and she'll say, "Oh my gosh, aren't you worried that people are going to be mad at you for what you just said?" And I always say, "Are you mad at me?" And she says, "Well, no." And I say, "You're not special. You're just like everybody else. They're not mad at me either." When we speak about our vulnerabilities, we just make everybody else feel a little bit better about themselves because we're all flawed. We're all terrible in one way or another. We all make bad decisions and we're all selfish. The problem is we go on Facebook and nobody is selfish or flawed. We see their ideal selves. If you go onto my Facebook page, you will discover I share all of my flaws. I say, "Hey, I made an old lady cry at the restaurant yesterday. I think that's okay. I think I did the right thing. What do you think?" I get hammered for it, right? But they come back the next day, right? They come back in greater numbers every time because they do the same kind of thing. I'm just willing to say it out loud. So you have to understand that getting on stage and being vulnerable is a hard thing to do, but the hard thing to do and the right thing to do are often the same thing. So you have to be brave. You got to do it once. Each time it will get easier.
Nice.
Well, that's amazing. Well, even seasoned teachers and speakers could use your book because I love where you say that it's not only an obligation to entertain, but an opportunity. I love that perspective. What a shift that helped me with in my mind and thinking about it.
Well, I've been, as a teacher for 21 years, I've been teaching elementary school. I have been through a lot of professional development, as you can imagine. And I can count on two hands the number of times that I have seen a presenter stand up with the idea that I must entertain these people in order to teach these people. That opportunity to actually be engaging. I think people stand in front of other people and think we want to listen about their newfound way of, teaching algebra. It's amusing to me that when in these contexts, these training contexts, that people go into them assuming everybody's excited. If you take the opposite perspective, which is what I always do, which is no one wants to be here, no one wants to learn, and no one likes me. That is how I plan every one of my talks, every one of my lessons to my students, every training session that I ever do, every workshop I teach is no one wants to be here, no one likes me, everyone wants to go home. My first job is to entertain. I have to make them laugh, or I have to make them connect with me. I have to make them believe in me. And once all those things happen, I can get people to do almost anything. I can get people to stay with me for 10 hours and it feels like 2, because I have found a way to be engaging and entertaining. It is your primary goal when you're speaking to people. I think, who said that? Kevin Smith actually said it in his book. He said, every time you stand in front of people, it is your obligation first to be entertaining. And I just totally believe he's right. When I work with student teachers and they come to me and they say, here's my lesson plan, I always say, why do the kids want to learn this? What have you given them to get to hook them? What is the thing? And so often they say, well, it's a great lesson. And I say, you don't understand. When I was a kid, I hated you. Like I hated you. You kept me from playing baseball. So I hated you. You have to assume everybody hates you. But so often teachers were the good kids. They were the ones who loved to go to school and loved to learn. So they just assume everybody's like them. You've already got those kids. It's the ones that hate you that are going to cause you problems. You gotta win those people over. So before anyone teaches a lesson in my classroom, they must give me the reason why kids will want to learn. And that could just be choice. It could be as simple as you get to choose your partner today. Or it could be as simple as I've given you 10 multiplication problems, pick 4, any 4 that you want. Oddly, that's enough for kids to get excited about. You can do the same thing to adults too. You can say, all right, I'm going to be here for 8 hours today. I'm going to be teaching 4 sessions. You come to any 3 that you want, and 1 you should totally take a nap, right? Instantly, everyone loves me just because I've given them an option, a choice, It's like when I walk into a training session and they've got the little tents and they're telling me where to sit. I hate them. I hate them instantly. You're telling me, a grown-ass man, where to sit? First of all, I have PTSD, but I cannot sit in a place where I can mark my exits at all times.
Oh, yeah.
I'm uncomfortable. I'm going to be really angry the whole time, and I'm going to be worried that someone's coming to kill me. That is a genuine feeling that I have when I can't see a doorway, right? Even in my own home, where I am sitting right now, I am sitting here because I can see the doorway to my house. And that is important to me as a person who struggles with post-traumatic stress. But more importantly, I just acknowledge that people like to sit where they want. And that can be a simple thing that people can do that will make everybody a little happier. So it's just the idea that you have to be entertaining, you have to be engaging. It's a requirement, but it's also an opportunity. I have a chance to make people happy. Why would I not go for it?
Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
That's
I
so
like that a
brilliant.
lot. All right. So I'd like to get into our speed round. So I'll ask you 5 quick questions. You give me the first answer that comes to your head. I'm actually going to make it 6. I saw briefly your hat. So do you
Which hat am
think,
I wearing? Oh, okay.
do you think the Patriots re-signed Tom Brady?
Yes, I do. I
You
think
do?
the Patriots re-signed Tom Brady, and I think he would be crazy to go anywhere else. And I think he knows that.
Yeah, I do agree with that. We are on the west coast of Canada in Vancouver. We're Raiders fans.
I'm
We
sorry.
were buried in their stadium.
Really?
Yeah, sorry. I know. I know. I've thought way back to 2001 multiple times, and it was a fumble, by the way.
Uh-huh.
Okay. All right. Do our speed round. What do you do for fun?
I do a lot of things. I wrestle with my son, and we attempt to hurt each other. I play a lot of golf. I read and listen to a lot of podcasts. I guess those are the things I
Oh.
do a lot. Yeah.
Nice.
Mm-hmm.
And count your steps.
I don't count my steps. I think that's a little crazy to count your steps. I think once people start counting their steps, they try to hit arbitrary numbers, and I don't believe in arbitrary numbers. Like if you show me a list and you say, here's the top 10, I don't believe in your list because I feel like you just negotiated your list to become 10. I'm much more interested in your list of 11 great things than 10 because 11 feels more authentic to me.
Cool.
Good answer.
What is your favorite quote?
My favorite quote, it's right here. It's by H. Jackson Brown Jr. He's a writer. He said, don't say you don't have enough time. You have exactly the same number of hours per day as were given to Helen Keller, Pasteur, Michelangelo, Mother Teresa, Leonardo da Vinci, Thomas Jefferson, and Albert Einstein.
Nice. I like that a lot.
It's a good one.
Who has inspired you the most?
There's a lot of choices for this one.
Mhm.
You know, I think the person that has inspired me the most, oddly, is Stephen King.
Mm.
You know, his book on writing is what I wanted Storyworthy to be. His is the book on how to write. I wanted mine to be that version for storytelling, which is memoir combined with real practical applications. And he has this amazing story on writing, a book everyone should read, where he's getting ready to sort of give up on writing. He doesn't think it's going to happen. His kid is sick, and he can't afford the pink medication to get rid of the ear infection, and he just doesn't think it's going to happen. And ultimately, what happens is, very famously, he's writing his first novel, Carrie, and he doesn't think it's going very well, so he throws it in the trash. And his wife pulls it out of the trash and says, "Hey, this is really good. Let me help you with like the girl menstruating parts, because you clearly don't know anything about that, but it's going to be a good book." And she saves the book, and that launches his writing career.
Oh,
And
Wow.
I remember reading that, actually listening to it for the first time on a treadmill at a time when I didn't think my first book was ever going to go anywhere, and thinking, all right, I'm doubling down. I'm going to really make an effort, and I'm going to like not give up on this thing. That story made a big difference in my life. And I think he's a brilliant writer. I think he's written some terrible novels, and he would acknowledge it. There was a period of time when cocaine was writing the novels and not really him. But I also think he's written some of the greatest stories ever written, and I adore everything that he says.
Wow.
That's amazing.
What's your favorite book? Or
That
do
is
we
a
all-
hard question, too. I have a standard answer because I think it's kind of a ridiculous question. But my standard answer is Treasure Island,
Oh.
because it's a book I can always read and always love. And it's a book that I loved when I was 10, and a book that I loved when I was 20, and it's a book that I love today. So it passes the test of time. It's incredibly exciting to me even now. And, you know, it's the kind of book where I can read it to a kid and have just as much fun, you know, as the kid is having while reading it. But I mean, honestly, I have 100 favorite books, but Treasure Island is always the answer for me.
Cool. Nice. What is a really good tool or resource you could recommend to our listeners?
You know, I guess Evernote is the thing that I think I use the most often. You know, it's an app that lives on my phone. It lives on my computer as well, as a really high functioning app on the computer, which doesn't really exist very often. And it also exists on the internet all simultaneously. So wherever I am, I can access Evernote. But it's just the opportunity, or the ability to record notes, take a photo, take a video, take audio, drop it all into a single, easy to manipulate folder. So when I'm working on a story, I might record the first half of a story and be really happy with it and drop that into a folder. And then I might see something and I'm like, oh, I'm going to put that in the story, but I'll take a picture of it and that'll drop into the folder. And then I'll think of something and take some notes on it. And then my son might say something and I'll record him and say that again. I want to put that in the story, get a video of him, and it all goes into one place. I just think it's a go-to thing that everyone can be using, no matter what you're doing, whether you're, you know, my wife uses it for recipes and for photos and whatever you're doing. If you're trying to hold on to knowledge, information, bits of data, it's the perfect place for it.
It's a great time saver between your devices.
Yeah.
It is. It's really fantastic. I mean, I don't know how people live without it, frankly. You know, my ability to just click on Evernote on my computer and then click on Evernote on my phone, and knowing both are syncing and both apps are so seamless. It's just, they did it right. And it's free unless you get the premium version. So you're not even spending any money until you realize, oh, I want to take it to the next level, which you should, but try the free version. It's just as good.
We love it too.
Yeah, cool. Now, how can people listening connect with you further?
Well, if you go to MatthewDix.com, my name, you'll kind of find everything there. You know, I'm on social media, on Instagram and Twitter, just my name, @MatthewDix. My wife and I produce a podcast called Speak Up Storytelling. We've been producing our show for 8 years now. And in our podcast, in each episode, we take one of the stories that has been told at one of our shows, and we play it, and then we dissect it. We talk about what's going well and what can be improved in that story.
Mhm.
And so that's a good place to it's sort of a good place to get to know us a little bit, as a couple. It's been an amazing thing. I can't tell you how many times we get emails from people who say, we love the storytelling, but listening to the two of you argue about something in a way where you don't want to kill each other has actually been informative to marriages. People have written to us and said, I got my husband to listen to the podcast with me so we can listen to what a healthy couple sounds like, which always is like so humbling to me. I didn't realize we were doing anything right. I just knew we were talking about stories. But it's a good place to learn about stories, to get to know us a little bit, and to engage in storytelling in a meaningful way. So you can find us there too. But if you go to MatthewDix.com, you'll find all of that stuff sort of packaged up there.
Awesome.
That's great. Well, we've connected with you and your book and everything you talk about so much because we really believe, like you, that storytelling really brings people together and connects humanity.
Yeah, you should start a show. Like you said, there wasn't a moth in your city, but like we didn't have a moth in our city, so we launched a show. Mm-hmm. And it's not really hard to do at all. And you will discover there are people who want to come and hear stories and tell stories. We started it on a whim, thinking maybe we'll do this once or twice a year. And now we produce shows monthly. And just producing those shows has resulted in me now traveling the world, teaching storytelling to corporations and nonprofits and the clergy and Native Americans and crazy things, professors and teachers, everybody in the world, just by producing these shows and then eventually the podcast. But it's connected us to so many people. So you should launch a show.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
yeah.
It's a good idea.
It is.
Yeah, do it tonight. Don't waste any time.
Do it right.
Say yes. I want you to say yes to the opportunity I just presented to you.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Very good. When it happens, do me a favor, please send me an email and say, it happened. We did a show. We found a place. We put a microphone down. We found 5 people to tell a story, and it was not terrible. Send that to me so I can know it happened. I'd love to hear
Awesome.
that.
Okay.
I'm holding you accountable. I don't know if you feel the accountability, but I'm trying to impose accountability.
Well, I know you're leaning in and I'm leaning back. I can feel it.
I'm not getting the enthusiasm, frankly, that I really want and expect. I want you're right, we should totally do this.
Yes, we agree. We will totally do it.
Okay, good. That's what I'm looking for.
We want to do a chapter of your, do you have chapters for what you've created?
Chapters?
Yeah.
Oh, you want a chapter of Speak Up?
Yeah.
Not officially, but we know of at least 4 shows, including one in Australia, that has launched after listening to our podcast, hearing about our show. A couple times people have emailed us and asked us sort of advice on how to launch the show, so we're happy to do that. We're actually working on an episode of our podcast now, which teaches you how to do it, going through all the mistakes we made so you don't make the same mistakes. So no, we've never thought about launching a chapter of our own show.
You could license it.
Well,
teach people.
My first thought was that sounds like a lot of work, and no, but then my second thought was, I guess I should look into this because this is probably a good idea.
We'll
and I know of at least
Vancouver chapter.
Yeah, I know of at least 2 other people who have this kind of a system where they have launched sister shows in other cities.
Mm-hmm.
So okay, it's my next thing it's my next thing.
Awesome.
Right. When we're ready to go, I'm going to be in touch with you and I'm going to say, okay, we're ready to launch.
Yes.
Well, I am enthusiastic for that.
Yes, we'll be your first.
Yeah, but
licensees.
you're enthusiastic about the easier version of what I've told you to do.
All right, Matthew.
Sorry, I was speaking to a woman recently at a show, and I was sort of leaning in on her, telling her to do something, and she turned to her friend and said, "Help! There's like a witch doctor here trying to change my life."
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being with us today, Matthew. We really appreciate you letting us interview you.
It's my pleasure. It was an honor, and it was a lot of fun to talk to you.
Wow, that was incredible.
What a great interview. Man, he's got great stories, and he is so funny.
He's really funny, and he's just so accessible. He's so real. He's so down to earth.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just amazing when you're a fan of someone and then you get to meet them. You never know what you're going to get, but he was just amazing. What a great guy to meet.
Yeah. Unbelievable.
Yeah. So his book we highly recommend it. It is really, really good. It's got, step-by-step instructions in there on how to do the different stories, but also, You know, it really shows how to tell a story and why doing so matters.
Absolutely.
So you can get a copy of this through the link in our show notes. Go to inspiringshow.com and scroll down and get this episode. And when you click on that, you can get all the links to Matthew Dix, to his book, and everything we talked about in this episode. Also, join us in the Facebook group on Facebook, The Inspiring Show on Facebook.
Follow us on Instagram.
Yep.
And also, if you would like to join us as friends of the podcast, just click the membership in the menu of our website, www.inspiringshow.com. And remember, everybody, until next time, you have a story and your story matters.